Hello, this is Francesca Vigliani from Cloud Academy. Thank you for joining us for this webinar on building a cloud-focused security program. I'd like to welcome John Visneski, Director of Information Security and Data Protection Officer at the Pokemon Company International, where he's responsible for everything from corporate IT systems to customer-facing platforms. John has an impressive resume. He was the Cyberspace Control Officer in the US Air Force and has also worked in the Pentagon, where he assisted in steering the Air Force in the direction of the cloud and modern cybersecurity techniques. Thank you, John, for being with us today.
It's great to be here, absolutely. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're dialing in from. Thanks for joining us today. I had really kind of prepared to give a webinar on where to find the best oysters in the Pacific Northwest, but now I found out that it's about cloud security, so I suppose that will have to do. So we'll have to save oysters for later. Over the course of this webinar, we're going to talk about three things when it comes to building out your security program. We're going to talk about operational mentality, building your team, and building an environment. Don't get me wrong, each one of these topics, we could do a deep dive for hours and hours. And if you gave me a couple beers, we could deep dive for days and days. So if you have any additional questions at the end of the webinar, please feel free to type them in. And if we don't get to all the questions, my email address will be available towards the end so that you can shoot me a note for any additional information, or if you want to pick my brain or you think I'm crazy. But before we deep dive into that, let's really get to what is the challenge? What are we talking about here? You know, most companies started embracing the cloud due to IT savings, right? So get rid of the hardware, get rid of some of your staff, and really start embracing things according to the business. This should be pretty intuitive to most of you, as this is a Cloud Academy webinar, not an on-prem Academy webinar. So what should also be intuitive to you is that once companies started embracing the cloud for IT savings, the business really caught on to how this can enable them to move faster, enable them to compete with the market. Analogous to that, security teams are sort of in the same boat. There's really two camps at the moment, in my opinion, on the one, and the spectrum in between. On the one end, you have progressive security teams that have embraced the cloud, are moving into DevSecOps, are using SaaS tools and a wide variety of different cloud capabilities in order to keep pace with the business. I like to think that here at the Pokemon Company International, we're a lot closer to that camp than anything else. In the other camp, you have sort of a legacy set of information security professionals who are largely still on-prem. You know, the business might have some plans to move to the cloud. These folks tend to be a little hesitant as far as, you know, is the cloud going to be secure enough? I feel like I can secure my on-prem resources a lot better, a lot more effectively than I can in the cloud. The analogy I like to use is these are the folks that are rowing a canoe, and the canoe is sort of filling full of water, and they've been bailing it out, and a speedboat pulls up next to them, and they don't want to get in the speedboat because it's too fast, it's too risky. I think that's really the challenge that we all face, you know, regardless of the maturity of your cloud computing programs or your cloud security programs, is how do you embrace that speedboat, and how do you become a wizard of risk management in order to understand how do you best leverage the cloud in order to keep your business secure. Because like it or not, the same way that the business pulled you know, their IT infrastructure into the cloud for business needs, the business is going to pull you into the cloud for security needs, whether you like it or not. So how do we start thinking about securing our cloud computing in a way that keeps pace with the business? In my opinion, it all starts with an operational mindset. On the right, you're going to see a diagram referred to as the OODA loop. Many of you have probably heard of the OODA loop, but for those who haven't, I'll give a quick background. There was an Air Force major named John Boyd, a Vietnam Aero fighter pilot, and he came up with this concept because we were having some issues in the Air Force, you know, with air-to-air combat with our adversaries. And what he posited was really, when it came to the fighting your adversaries, you needed to be able to observe unfolding circumstances, information, interactions with the environment. You needed to orient yourself based on your processes, based on your training, based on your your cultural traditions, based on analysis and synthesis of the event at hand. You needed to make a decision, and then you needed to act on the decision. And that didn't just stop there. That act was really a test of whether or not you were oriented correctly and you made a correct decision. And so it feeds right back into that observability loop. At the end of the day, this is not just a military practice. It's really been started to be applied across business, across the legal field, across law enforcement, a whole lot of different industries that kind of recognize that whether or not you're in a dogfight with another fighter jet, or you're just trying to compete with your rival bank or your rival company, this is a good way of looking at how you make decisions. And so every decision we make at the Pokemon Company when it comes to security is with the OODA loop in mind, whether it's risk management, whether it's policy making, whether it's our architecture, and then obviously, the easiest example is incident response. Tactics, techniques, procedures, threat actors, all those things change so rapidly that in order to keep pace with the adversary and to defeat the adversary, every decision we make is with how are we tightening our OODA loop to be faster than whoever might want to compromise our systems. The OODA loop also works when it comes to partnering with other organizations within your technology department, whether it's DevOps or IT, test, developers. At the end of the day, especially when it comes to DevOps, what they're trying to do is continually move faster, whether it's embracing serverless technology, whether it's embracing containers. Really what they're trying to do is deliver capability as quickly as possible. And in order for you to keep pace with that, you need to do the same things. You need to observe what they're changing. You need to be able to orient yourself based on what you have in place as far as architecture and tool sets. You need to make decisions and you need to act on those decisions really quickly. Because at the end of the day, what that's going to do is allow you to be a problem solver first and a security practitioner second. That's key. A lot of organizations, their security team are if anyone read the blog I posted a few weeks ago, their security teams are Dr. No. They really exist to tell people what they can't do. And the problem with that is, the more you tell people what they can't do, they're going to just stop inviting you to the meetings, frankly. And when you stop getting invited to the meetings, you lose visibility. And when you lose visibility, your overall security posture goes down. And so positioning yourself as a problem solver first and a security practitioner second is the key to ensuring that you can continually tighten your OODA loop and tighten the OODA loops of the organizations around you in order to keep pace in the cloud environment, particularly when you start to scale. The Pokemon Company, no one expects 800 million downloads. Niantic's Pokemon Go application was really a surprise for a lot of different folks. And when you start talking in terms of that sort of scalability, in order for a security team to keep pace, it's essential that you are effective and efficient before you even start considering security. Otherwise, you're going to fail. We'll get to that effectiveness and efficiency in a little bit. So again, not just security operations, but how do our decisions enable the business, and how do we make sure that our OODA loops are tight and fast, not just faster than our adversaries, but also able to keep pace with other business organizations. Building your team. So you can't do it by yourself. As much as you can automate and as much as you can leverage machine learning, you're going to need actual humans to provide context. There's this perceived cybersecurity talent shortage, information security talent shortage. If you Google it right now, that's most of the articles that come up when it comes to talent management within cybersecurity is how do we grow these people? How do we grow them faster? How do we grow them more? Recently, the Government Accountability Office came out with a report on the Department of Defense talking about the talent shortage within the DoD with respect to cybersecurity talent. And the same applies for us. The same applies for Silicon Valley and the Pacific Northwest and Boston and Austin and all these different places. Every company needs these sorts of people. And the problem you end up seeing is that hiring authorities, people in my position, people in some of your positions, they're looking for these purple unicorns, as I like to call them. You've heard them. You've seen the job description. It's 7 to 8 years of operational or engineering experience within the security field. Preferably they are deep Splunk experts. Preferably they have cloud experience in your particular cloud provider, whether it's AWS or GCP or Azure. Hopefully they have their CISSP and they're certified ethical hacker, and on and on and on and on and on. And really what you end up doing is narrowing your aperture to a point where you can't really find those people in great numbers. And frankly, when you do find those people, organizations like Amazon or Microsoft or some of those bigger companies are going to be able to overpay, to be frank, in order to get that talent, because they need it just as much as you do. So what we do here, and what I suggest doing, is prioritizing attitude and aptitude. The security environment, the DevOps environment, the cloud environment changes so fast, that attitude and aptitude is a requirement for you to keep pace. I don't care how good your security engineers are, they're going to spend 70% of their day Googling, because technology and tool sets and threat actors change so fast, that they're going to be constantly learning. And so when it comes to attitude and aptitude versus experience, the other nice thing about deprioritizing the experience itself is that if you need to start changing out tool sets and you need your security ops analyst or your security engineer to learn a new tool set on the fly, if you hire folks that have that sort of intellectual curiosity and are lifelong learners and have the attitude and the aptitude to pick up new things on the fly, it's going to make you a lot more flexible. And in that flexibility, you're going to be able to help out your DevOps team or your IT team or your test team or your finance team or your business intelligence team, so on and so forth. Because if they need a new tool and they need you to get really smart on how to secure that tool, you're going to have the people in place that don't have this sort of technology lock-in attitude where, I only like AWS, or I only like Splunk, or I only use Carbon Black or something like that. So really prioritizing that attitude and aptitude is key. The other thing that you find is that most security professionals, some of the best security professionals in the world, weren't grown as security professionals, right? They came out of systems admin, or they were DevOps engineers, they were test engineers, hell, philosophers or physicists. I didn't start as a security practitioner. My first job in the Air Force was as a combat communications officer setting up radio networks. Really, what you end up having to look for is people who understand how systems work and how they integrate. How is the sausage made? Systems admins have for a long time been at the front line of security in many ways, because they're the ones that are responsible for the pipes. They're the ones that are responsible for how those systems are all working together. DevOps engineers particularly, especially because of how deep they end up getting trained in some of these cloud platforms, not only do they understand how those systems work and integrate, but they can see the gaps and seams within your cloud, and understanding where those gaps and seams are the first steps to being able to secure what your business holds valuable. All of those same attributes of the best sysadmins, DevOps engineers, test engineers, so on and so forth, are the same attributes that you'd have for a great security professional. So why would you leave an open job requirement for 6 months because you're looking for a purple unicorn, when in reality, if you find someone who's really great at DevOps or is an automation expert, why not hire them in that first month and then spend the next 4 months getting them trained? At the end of the day, not only is that going to get you the capability faster, but having a homegrown security practitioner who has the attitude and the aptitude to continually change in a dynamic environment is a better bet than getting someone straight out of the box. Not only that, when you invest in someone personally and professionally and you give them that first shot, when it comes to being a security practitioner, they're going to pay you back and run through brick walls for you. And that's what you're really going to need should a big incident kick off. The underlying theme in all of this is embracing automation. Your team is never going to be as big as you'd like it to be. Your team is never going to stay as long as you'd like them to, because you're going to continue to get them trained, and they need to have promotion opportunities, and they'll move to a different company, and so on and so forth. And so what you really need to do is figure out how are you going to automate all of those pressure points that enable your team to stay light and lean. The other nice thing about embracing automation aggressively is that when you automate things, the point of automation is taking people out of processes and taking the manual activity out of processes, and that is inherently more secure. What it also does is, going back to that operational mindset as being a problem solver first, what it allows you to do is embrace effectiveness and efficiency before you even start thinking about security. I mean, those are the two spoonfuls of medicine that help spoonfuls of sugar that help that security medicine go down. Because at the end of the day, your business does not care about security as much as you like to. Corporately they might care about security, but Tom in finance does not care about security. What he really cares about is his ability to do his job effectively and efficiently, get paid, and go home. So the more that you can embrace automation, the more that you can become a problem solver first and a security practitioner second, allows you to leverage that effectiveness and efficiency in order to secure your environment in the best way possible. So look for folks on your team that are automation experts, or if they're not automation experts yet, focus their training on that even more than you focus them on specific security certifications or ethical hacking or anything like that. How do you organize your team? This is just an example. This is how we organize our team. We kind of think of things in 3 pillars. You have your governance, risk, and compliance. You have your engineering, and you have your operations. The government's risk and compliance, it might not be the sexiest thing in the world, but regardless of if you're on-prem or if you're in the cloud, it really should be the foundation of your security program. People don't like to do risk frameworks. It's a lot harder in practice than it is in books. But at the end of the day, doing the due diligence of getting a good risk framework together that is based on your regulatory requirements is really going to lay that sort of foundation. Your engineering team should be looking at that foundation you've laid and starting to design architecture, implementing tools, standards, and best practices that are going to support your regulatory requirements, your risk framework, really where the keys to the kingdom are. And then once that architecture and those tools are in place, your operations folks are going to be operating it. They're going to be driving that Ferrari that you built. So that's when we start talking about your security operations center, your monitoring, and so on and so forth. What you'll notice is the last bullet in each of these is automation. I don't care if it's policy writing. I don't care if it's for GDPR doing your data protection impact assessments or your data protection addendums or your security reviews. Everything that you can do to automate those particular processes are going to help you move with the speed that you need to in order to keep pace in a cloud environment. Now, I bin these in 3 buckets, but they are not silos. I can't stress that enough. A lot of teams, the way they organize themselves, whether they're security teams or whether they're DevOps teams or what have you, what they end up doing is putting a manager in charge of governance, risk, and compliance, a manager in charge of engineering, a manager in charge of operations. They fill out those teams, and then in reality, what ends up happening is most of the teams don't really talk to each other, or your operations folks say things like, well, I don't really do compliance. I work in the SOC. Or your risk compliance folks say, I don't really care about operations. My job is to lay out policies. That's a losing proposition, and particularly in cloud environments. The object of the game should be flattening your organization to the point where as a CISO or a director of information security or a manager in the security department, you're pushing execution to the lowest level possible. The way you push that execution to the lowest level possible is by ensuring that your teams are working as horizontally as possible. Sharing information to the point where they achieve a sort of shared consciousness, where when your governance, risk, and compliance people are writing security policies, they have a real understanding of what kind of operational impact those security policies are going to have. It goes right back to the OODA loop. You shouldn't be writing policies unless those policies are directly impacting your ability to speed up that loop. In the reverse, your operations folks having an understanding of what policies are in flight, how those policies are influenced, will really help you ensure that the policies make sense and ensure that the operations are completely aligned. At the end of the day, a lot of folks on the tactical level think that all the policies written at the strategic level are written in stone, when in reality, it's just humans that are trying to do their best, whether it's retention policies or subject access request policies or what have you. And so ensuring that your teams are as horizontally aligned as possible and continually working together is your best bet. What we do here at TPCI is every morning, my team has a 9:45 standing Slack meeting. It's super informal. It usually only takes us about 5 or 10 minutes, but everybody on the team jumps on the horn and kind of explains, hey, this is what I'm working on today. These are the meetings I have. These are the expected outcomes of the meetings. These are the questions I have, so on and so forth. That achieves a couple of different things. From my perspective, what it does is obviously it gives me visibility into what's going on in the environment and the ability to, on the fly, give feedback or bump the vision a little bit or make decisions if necessary. The second thing it does is it starts to achieve this concept of shared consciousness. Whether or not the people are owning, whether or not an engineer is owning something in the operational space or something in the policy space, they have a general awareness of all of the projects, all of the activities, all of the meetings that are in flight. And so almost by osmosis, they start to have an understanding of what everybody else is working on. What that does is enable that execution at the lowest possible level. Because you share that information across your teams to the point where they understand what each hand is doing, it expands their aperture so that they can see the whole picture. Which means that when one of my security engineers is in a meeting and needs to make a decision on a particular standard within a project, or needs to take on a particular amount of risk, they don't have to keep asking me or asking their manager's permission in order to make that decision, because they've already ingrained themselves with all the other parts of the team so that they can start making decisions with about 95% accuracy. Now, is that other 5% a risk? Sure. But that 95% is going to give you a speed of decision making that allows you to keep pace with all of those teams. Your DevOps team does not want to have to wait for the director of information security in order to implement a change on their EC2 instances, and nor should they have to. What they really need to be able to do is be able to make those particular decisions with a reasonable amount of understanding of what the risk is, what the mitigations are, and then they can press forward. Attitude and aptitude beat experience. Moving on to the environment. So the vendor customer relationship has sort of changed over the last 10 years or so. I saw this a lot when I was in the Department of Defense. There was this tendency for the customer, in that case it was the Air Force, to walk into a meeting with a vendor, be it Tanium or CrowdStrike or Oracle or whoever, and you present your budget and say, look how much money I have, now give me stuff. That's changed a lot. At the end of the day, just as much as a customer is looking to do business with a vendor that provides a good product, vendors are looking for customers that are going to be diligent, be respectful, be helpful, show up to meetings on time, show up prepared, give good feedback. It really is a two-way street. The substantive business relationship of the future when it comes to cybersecurity is getting into business with companies that have a vested interest in seeing you be successful. And that goes both on the vendor and the customer side. And so to that end, the way that we've strategized here about how we build out our architecture is we find those substantive business relationships with organizations that are willing to have that back and forth feedback loop. And we make those the foundational tools of our platform. What this does for us is two things. One, it gives us an idea of what companies we're going to be in business with for a little bit longer and what their roadmaps look like. But because we have that continual feedback loop, whether it's embracing beta testing or trying out new features or giving valid feedback on the features that we don't like, what you end up seeing is over time, those roadmaps for those vendors end up aligning a lot with what your roadmap looks like. I'm not just concerned about what they're providing me now, I'm concerned about what they provide me over the next 2, 3, 5 years. Now, there's a lot of question about vendor lock-in. Well, I think you can have your cake and eat it too. So you build this foundational, this foundational tool set, this foundational platform based on vendors and tool sets that you have that good business relationship with. And then the rest of your stack can be almost completely modular. The idea here is as tactics, techniques, and procedures change, as threat actors change, as the world changes around you, as your environment changes, even if you are moving from one cloud provider to another, you're moving on-prem into the cloud, the idea here is to be flexible enough that should something change or should a tool set no longer fit your need, you've kept your stack modular enough that you can swap things out. Now, this is easier said than done in a lot of cases. We're pretty well resourced here. And so depending on how big of an investment that ends up looking like, we can move pretty quickly. But even for companies that are a little bit more resource constrained than the Pokemon company, this is a good way to start looking at your architecture. It's less about building a house and more about composing an orchestra. And if you continually try to tune your environment in that respect, I think you're going to be a lot more successful. All right. So I rambled, I talked for a lot, but happy to take any questions. And as I said, if we don't get to all of your questions, by all means, my email address will be after this slide. Feel free to shoot me a note, and I'll be happy to respond.
Awesome. Well, thank you, John. And we did receive a couple of questions on oysters, but I think we'll keep those for next time, okay?
Okay, sounds good. For the
No,
for the
just
record,
kidding.
the answer is the Hama Hama Oyster Farm on Hood Canal.
All right. All right, jokes aside, we do have some questions for you. So let's start with the first one. What's the biggest challenge you've encountered while setting up a security program?
The biggest challenge. I mean, that's a broad question. When I got to the company, the Pokemon company didn't have a security program for when I got here. I was talking to a friend of mine who worked for a different company in the security space, trying to get some advice, and he kind of heard the environment I was walking into and said, "Man, it sounds like you got strapped to the front of the Titanic with two blowtorches. You just got to figure out which iceberg you're going to melt first." And he's kind of right. The biggest challenge, especially with a security program that lacks maturity, is figuring out where are you going to take that first bite? What's the first decision you're going to make? Now the easy answer there, the perfect in a vacuum answer is, oh well, you need to build out your risk framework, right? You need to understand your regulatory statutes. You need to understand what it is you need to be protecting. You need to assign risk scores and all those sorts of things. Well, that's a lot easier said than done, because while you're trying to do that, you're also putting out daily fires. People are doing drive-bys. It's budget season, and you need to figure out, your firewall contract is up, and do you want to switch, or your antivirus contract is up, and you want to switch. And so that really ends up being the challenge, is figuring out where to get started. Now, even though that's pretty hard, if you take it up a level and really align yourself with your CFO, the board, what have you, and really do the due diligence of interviewing those folks and understanding, security aside, what is it that is the most important to them, and then distilling that into your way ahead, and then what are the tool sets and what are the decisions that you can make immediately in order to achieve those particular goals.
And what about problems? Is there maybe a specific problem that companies usually incur into in the process of setting up a security program?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big problem, and again, it should be intuitive for a lot of folks, but it still gets missed for a lot of security programs, is this issue of visibility. I think a lot of security programs kind of get ahead of their skis a little bit with respect to what they're trying to implement, because they don't have actual visibility into their environment. It's a fool's errand to try to secure something that you can't see. And so what you see a lot of companies do is, oh, they have antivirus in place, or they have an endpoint protection solution in place. They don't really have a whole lot of visibility into their cloud environments. They know that DevOps is doing something. They understand how VPCs work, so on and so forth. But without that sort of visibility, they end up doing things like paying pen testing companies large sums of money in order to get a B- report card. Well, I mean, the problem with pen testing, before you actually have an understanding of what your baseline looks like, is you're not really sure what they're actually testing you against. You're not really sure if they're actually finding everything, or if they're just writing something down, making you feel good, understanding that they're going to be able to come and get more money from you 6 months later. And so I think the biggest problem to solve first is the problem of visibility.
Okay, and what would you say is the best way to manage information assets while, setting up everything?
Well, yeah, I mean, one, align yourself with your DevOps team and your IT team. The same way that I was talking about, the same way I was talking about internally, how I structure the team to make sure that they achieve that sort of shared consciousness. The more that you can embed your security teams with the DevOps team and the IT team, not just only talking to them when you need something, or you need them to do work, or you need them to patch something, but get a real understanding for what their day-to-day business looks like. Get a real understanding for what their pain points look like. And by embedding yourselves with those teams, and trying to flatten your organization as much as possible, so that you have a day-to-day rapport with these folks, you're going to start to get a better feel for how are they managing their particular assets, what level of visibility do they have into their own environments, and then transitioning to once you have an understanding of that, it becomes a lot easier for you to have that visibility and for you to manage your assets, because it's not just you trying to do it. It really is. It takes the village to raise the child type of a proposition. Your biggest advocates need to be in your IT and your DevOps departments, because without them, you're not going to be able to get your job done.
Yeah, totally makes sense. We have just one more question, time for just one more questions. And in your opinion, what are the main things to keep into account when deciding on regulatory compliance and standards?
Whew, so the easiest answer is, what is going to hit the company hardest financially. Having an understanding of that, it might not be, it might not be the biggest problem you have, but in order to get the advocacy you're going to need from a budget perspective, appealing to the CFO's wallet, appealing to the board's wallet, is a pretty helpful strategy. Now that ends up being a losing proposition in the long run, because you never want to be the security professional that is constantly scaring the board or scaring your CFO, because then they don't want you in the meeting because they know that you always just have bad news. And so really from a regulatory and compliance standpoint, again, taking a step back and not really thinking as much about how big the fines are, right? GDPR, as an example, is 4% of your annual gross. Like, that's a lot of money for a company like us. But really, the bigger problem or the bigger impact isn't the 4% of our annual gross. It's the fact that we'd be on the front page of CNN. No one wants to be on the front page of CNN, but particularly a company like ours that values the trust of our customers as much as we can. And so while it's easy to put numbers associated with compliance standards, like this particular one will fine me this much, this particular one will fine me this much, really your job is to understand how those compliance standards and how those regulations align with your overall business objectives and your business goals. You never want to see a hospital that's not HIPAA compliant, right? It might not be the biggest fine that they can face, but it's certainly going to hit them the hardest because people don't want to go to hospitals that aren't HIPAA compliant. And so really it's a matter of aligning both the financials with your overall business objectives.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, John, for being with us today. It was truly a great session, and I'm so happy to have done this webinar with you. Looking forward to meeting you soon. And many thanks, of course, to everyone that joined us. We will notify you once the recording is available. If you have other questions for John, feel free to reach out to him via email. You can see his email address on the screen. Also, if you're looking to accelerate your security journey, visit us at cloudacademy.com, where you can also access our previous webinars on demand. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thanks for joining, everyone.